All right. Well, this is our last week getting together to talk about church history. I hope it's been helpful and informative to you. I know at the beginning of the class I said that class is more for me than for you, and if you get something out of it, that's good. But nevertheless, it's more for me in just the organizing and kind of systematizing my thoughts on all of this. Uh, Most of these things are things that I've studied in school, and so they're rattling around back there somewhere. And so, just to try and get them down on paper in my own words has been really helpful to me. Um, we've gone past what I personally have studied in school somewhat, and we've really relied pretty heavily on the Everett Ferguson textbook. Those books at the very beginning that we talked about, that Everett Ferguson book and the um, theology book by Kelly. Those have been really good sources. And if you want to look into this some more or want to look into it with some more detail, I highly recommend those. I've also been using my notes from various classes that I had at Freed-Hardeman, particularly from Dr. Brumback. He taught a early church fathers class back in 2020. And so I've used a lot of those notes. So just to know where I've kind of gotten my sources. And so if you're interested in this and want to look at these things a little bit more, that might be some places to get started looking at. We are going to be wrapping it up though today. We've covered a lot of material. We've covered literally over 1,000 years of material. And so last week we wrapped up our talks about the Eastern Church with the 600s and beyond that point. Really, it kind of becomes appropriate to start talking about the East and the Western churches separately. And so last week we talked about the Eastern Church and some of the challenges that they are going through in their growing pains. This week we're going to be talking about primarily the Western Church. That's what we're probably a little bit more familiar with as far as church history things go. But we're going to talk about the Western Church from the point where we left off, those 600s, going all the way up to the 11th century, where there's going to be this great schism that we've talked about and alluded to quite a bit, but it's going to be finally formalized there. And so as we get going and doing that, there's a lot that's happened in the Western Church. We've talked about those Germanic invasions that really destroyed the Roman Empire. And from the ashes of those Germanic invasions, you have the Byzantine Empire that emerges in the East. In the West, you have really just this almost feudalistic system of a whole bunch of different kingdoms that emerge. In the North, where many of us are pretty familiar with historically, you have the Anglo-Saxons, which are France and the British Isles, those places from which the English people come. The Anglo-Saxons, they've had some experience with Christianity in the past. There have been several missionaries that have gone to the land. There's a guy by the name of Ninian who's lives around 360 to 432. He's sometimes called the Apostle to Scotland or the one sent to Scotland, and he does a lot of his missionary work there. Perhaps the most famous example is Patrick of St. Patrick's Day fame. Patrick is living 396 to 461. He goes to Ireland and does his ministry there. And there's a lot of different legends that come up about Patrick that are not true. But he's a very significant, figure in popular Christian minds. He's going to be very significant, though, because he's going to come from Gaul and bring a lot of Gallic monasticism into Ireland. He had a very interesting life. He was kidnapped by pirates as a child, eventually found his way into a Gallic monastery, and then took to the mission field and went to Ireland and brought a lot of those monastic things that he had learned with him. And so what you're going to have is Celtic Christianity, which is a broad term that's used kind of loosely. it's going to be pretty distinctive. And it's going to have some impacts that are going to affect broader Christianity in the West. And so one of those impacts is going to be in the monastic life. Monasticism is going to be very, very prominent in this section of the world. You're going to have lots and lots of monasteries being built and being very influential in just the average Christian life. You're going to have some big emphasis on clan life. Bishops are going to be less significant in this area of the world than they are in other areas of the world. And abbots, the head of monasteries, are going to become increasingly influential. And so abbots are, in a lot of ways, more significant to the people of this area than the bishops are. There's going to be a big, strong push for missionary work. The Christians in this area of the world are going to see that, are going to believe that all Christians, not just some select clergy, not just some select few, but all Christians should and ought to be able to communicate the gospel with others. And so we're going to see that there's going to be a missionary outgrowth from this mission field later on. Very interestingly, you're going to have the rise of penance which will come largely from this area and will kind of infiltrate the rest of the Western church. Penance is the idea of making amends for sins that are committed. And so in the Anglo-Saxon world, confession is going to become increasingly significant, not just public confession, but private confession, confession to the priesthood. And so when you confess your sins, well, what do? Well, we got to lead to do some actions to satisfy that debt, that sinful debt we're incurring to a degree. And so penance is your punishment for your sins. And so there would be written down lists of these are appropriate ways to punish particular sins. And if somebody commits this type of sin, this is how they should respond. And so that's going to be a distinctive of Celtic Christianity. You're also going to have some oddities here in the Western world. They're going to have their own date for Easter, which, if you remember, those Paschal controversies were talked about a really long time ago. But they're still going to continue on among these Celtic Christians for some time, and they're going to have their own date for Easter. They're going to have their own distinctive tonsure. What that is it's a when you think about monks, you may sometimes think about the kind of strange haircuts that they get, where they may be bald on top and have like a band of hair around the sides of their head, or various. It's a religious expression of of getting your hair cut in a certain way, and so that's going to be something that's going to be distinctive of these monks in this time period. And they're also going to have a distinctive liturgy. And so the way they worship is going to be distinct. They're going to do a lot of those Latin rite things. And there's going to be certainly a strong Latin influence in their worship. But it's going to be significant because the preaching is done in Gaelic, which would be, the language of the people. And so they have that Latin influence, but they're also doing something a little bit different in their inclusion of Gaelic preaching. A couple of these important guys that come out of this period, one is Columbanus. He is an Irish monk who is friends with Pope Gregory the Great. If you remember, we've talked about Gregory a little bit. He's a very significant pope. He is going to be significant primarily because he is going to be the one that really introduces the idea of penance, and he's going to provide some penitential books, books that instruct you on how to do penance into mainland Europe. And so these books are going to teach, the appropriate response to certain sins. Somebody sins in this way. How should we respond? How should they make private penance for the sin? It's going to really push for confession to priests. and those priests are going to be the ones that decide the penance that needs to be paid, those sorts of things. And what you're going to see is that the consequence of this is that, largely speaking, by and large, penance is going to replace the typical practice of church discipline in the church. And so up until this point, church discipline was public, and it was a excommunication type thing. Now it's going to become more private, and it will not involve the whole church, but it's going to be something that you personally do, which will be a shift away from the way that things had been done for since the apostles, and since what the Bible teaches as well. Another interesting figure is going to be called, I don't know exactly how you say it, Bede. Sometimes he's called the Venerable Bede. He is going to be a significant figure just in popular English world. He's going to write a book called The Ecclesiastical History of the English People. The church, ecclesiastical means church. So, but what this book is going to do is it's going to really solidify in the mind of these people, these Anglo-Saxon people, an English identity. And so going forward, he's going to be a very significant, influential person in the idea of Englishness. And he's also going to be significant when you study the history of the English Bible and how English Bibles have been translated throughout time. He is going to have made a translation called the Bede translation. It probably is not a complete Bible that he produced. He probably dies before it's able to be completed. It at least contains the book of John. It's going to be a translation from the Latin Vulgate that Jerome had a big hand in, and be a translation into the common language of the people. That's going to be significant, although it has been lost now and we don't have any copies of it or anything. That's going to be he's going to be a precursor of a trend that's going to really take hold in coming centuries and be influential to men like Wycliffe and Tyndale and ultimately the King James and all those translations that have come from that. So he's going to be a significant person just in the popular history of English church. These Anglo-Saxon Christians, when we come into the 690s to 770s, they're going to be responsible for a big missionary push. So again, we said that missionary involvement or evangelistic involvement is a significant characteristic of the church in this time period, and that's what we're going to see. And so the Anglo-Saxons are going to, which were once a mission field, are going to now send missionaries out to Northwestern Europe. And this is significant because during this time, think about how much of the empire has been lost, how much of the significance of the Roman Western Church has been lost. With the rise of Islam and you've had significant portions of the South totally lost to Islam. Significant portions of the East totally lost to Islam. And now the barriers, the borders, or I guess, of the Western Church are going to be expanded to the north and to the east or to the west. And some characterizations of this mission, the Anglo-Saxons, they respect the Pope. They align themselves underneath the Pope, and they highly regard the authority of the Pope. And so what you see is now Western papal influence grows territorially. They work alongside local rulers, particularly the Franks. We're going to talk a lot more about the Franks here in just a minute. But the Frankish kings are going to be very significant. And these Anglo-Saxon Christians, missionaries, are going to make sure that they're working not only under the authority of the Pope, but under the authority of these local guys as well, under their protection. They're going to challenge paganism as being a superstition, as being a false doctrine, and really push back against a lot of those pagan beliefs. In the north, you have lots of adherence to Thor and to those Norse pagan gods. They're going to push back against that very heavily. Um, they're going to be practitioners of mass baptisms and mass conversions. And so, typically, when we think about baptism and conversion today, we think about it on a small scale. We might have a baptism here or there, or a baptism of individuals. Well, this is mass scale conversions of baptisms. We're baptized in the village. We're as a people, we're going to convert, and so they have conversion en masse, and as has kind of been the practice in certain groups. They baptize primarily on Easters, when Easter rolls around, or on Pentecost. And so those are going to be the days where baptism's practiced. They're going to organize as dioceses parishes, and really kind of establish these hierarchical systems of the church. They're going to establish monasteries. Again, the Anglo-Saxon church community is very monastic. The monks are very influential and very significant, and the missionaries that come from that type environment are going to reflect that in their establishment of monasteries. And these monasteries that they build are going to then serve as little anchor focal points from which further missionaries can be sent out. And so they establish little foothold monastic communities throughout these lands that are unevangelized. And from those monastic communities, they are able to grow and develop more and then send out more missionaries. And so the Anglo-Saxon Christians are going to have a pretty big influence on the way that the Western church grows and develops. You're then going to have what's called the Carolingian dynasty. In a couple dates that are significant. In 751, Ravenna, which is in Italy, falls to the Lombards. And even today, the area is called Lombardia. It's the Germanic Lombards. That's one of those Germanic peoples that comes in and conquers and all of that. And so they're a threat. Remember, the Germanic peoples may have some Christians, but are predominantly paganism. We talked about the big evangelistic pushes and movements that go on among these Germanic peoples. But in 751, Ravenna is going to fall. In 754, you have a Frankish Christian prince by the name of Pippin. He is going to be crowned as king by Pope Stephen II. And with the crowning of Pippin, a new dynasty is formed, the Carolingian dynasty. Pope Stephen II then says, well, Pippin, you are going to be the patrician of Rome, you and your sons. And so we will give you this authority among our peoples, and we're going to really start leaning on you. But we really need you to help give us something as well. And so you need to give us protection. These Lombards are barbarians. They're dangerous people. And so you're going to be tasked with protecting Rome and being the patron, the caregiver for Rome. And so an alliance then is struck between Rome and the church in the west and the Frankish Carolingian dynasty. And this is going to be really significant, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit today, but there's now a shift. For a long time, the church was heavily tied to the state of Rome itself, the Roman Empire. Ever since you have Emperor Constantine, who really merges the church and state. There's going to be this strong connection and strong reliance between the church and interplay between the church and the state. Well, the state's been destroyed. Roman Empire is not here anymore. The remnants that kind of rise out of the ashes in the east is the Byzantine Empire. And the Eastern Church is going to be very, very close to the Byzantine Empire. With emperors like Justinian and those guys that we talked about last week. That's not going to be the case for the Western Church. The capital city of the East of the Byzantine Empire is Constantinople. Constantinople's the head patriarch, really, of the Eastern Church. But in the West, they don't have that. And there's been much more factional in the West. And so the Western Church is really going to tie its horses to this Frankish Empire, and the Frankish Empire is going to be the protectors of Rome. And so then in 754, I think that's the wrong date. In 750, Pippin dies and is succeeded by his sons. I got the wrong date there. I'm not sure what it is actually on the top of my head. But Pippin dies eventually and is succeeded by his sons Carloman and Charles. Charles is sometimes called Charles the Great, and the French or Frankish of that is Charlemagne or Charles the Great. That's what Charlemagne means. Magne being like magnificent, the great. You've probably heard the name Charlemagne before. He's going to be very, very famous, very influential. 771, Charlemagne's brother is going to die, and Charlemagne will be left the sole ruler over this new-fledged kingdom, which will then turn into an empire. So let's talk about Charlemagne for a minute. In 768, Charlemagne takes over. I guess that's the date I should have put up rather than 754. 768, Pippin dies, I suppose. In 768, though, Charlemagne takes over, and he is going to really expand the borders of his kingdom. I've got a couple maps to look at here in just a minute, but he is going to really push the borders, push it up north, push it up to the east, push it down south, and the border is going to grow pretty much to encompass what we consider the main part of Europe. The military expansions are also going to be accompanied by forced evangelism, forced conversion. Charlemagne is a very big fan of Augustine. He's a big fan of Augustine's writing, The City of God, that talks about the tragedy of the Roman destruction by the Germanic peoples. And Charlemagne's going to really see that as see in himself a capability to rebuild what was lost. And Charlemagne wants to really anchor himself to the church and to create this another great empire. And so he is a ambitious guy. Augustine also, though, in his City of God, he is a proponent of just war theory, the idea of conquering kingdoms have the obligation to convert the conquered peoples, even by force, even by violence, if it comes to that. And so Charlemagne's going to do that. He is going to make infant baptism absolutely necessary. If a child's not baptized, then he's a pagan. And so Charlemagne, when he conquers these lands, anyone who's not Christian, they're going to be, whether they like it or not. You have some some changes that begin to happen with his rise as far as church organization goes. He is going to be responsible for appointing bishops and abbots. Traditionally, that's kind of been up to the churches or to the church. It's not really been a political thing. But now you have the Roman emperor that has a hand in the appointing, not Roman emperor, the king, who has a hand in the appointing of these ecclesiastical positions. So that's going to be significant. There's going to be some, just changes in just the way things run. Clergy are going to start wearing special clothes and those sorts of things just in the everyday life. What's going to be really significant, though, is the emergence of canonical clergy. So what does that mean? Well, up until this point, clergy have been kind of segregated into two different classes, so to speak. You've had what's called secular clergy, not secular because it's immoral or worldly or anything like that. But the idea here is clergy that live amongst the world. And they minister to the people, and they're out and involved in the communities and those sorts of things. That's been one type of clergy. The other type of clergy is called regular clergy. The word regular there, the Latin term regula is the term like rule. And so these are clergy that live under certain rules. Think like the monks, monastic clergy. What canonical clergy is an emergence of basically both. And so your everyday clergymen now are going to be now subjugated to a rule that forced upon them. And so we're going to see the clergy in the West really start to change in the way that they function. You're going to have an interesting occasion on Christmas Day of 800. Leo II is going to be crowned, or Leo II is going to crown Charlemagne as the emperor. And so he's going to really solidify this merger between the Western Church and the kingdom of the Franks, the Carolingian dynasty. And I think it's technically an outdated term now, but when people talk about the Holy Roman Empire, this is what they're talking about. This merger between the Western Church and the Carolingian dynasty. Now you have this Holy Roman Empire that comes about, and Charlemagne sees himself as almost this new Constantine. But all is not necessarily well. There's going to be some political tensions here. Who's the real authority? Is it Charlemagne or is it the Pope? Because Charlemagne has the ability to appoint bishops, and he's really this significant, powerful figure as far as political power goes. But the Pope is the one who's given him this title. And if the Pope can give you the title, can the Pope take the title away? Well, this is a question, and there's not a clear answer here. And so there's some tensions here about, what is the exact relationship between the church and the state here, and who's really in charge? During this time, this is a map, I suppose, of the world immediately after these Germanic invasions. As you can see, I guess my head might be covering it on the video, but this yellow corner, kind of where my head is, that's the Byzantine Eastern Empire, which is pretty large and pretty solid. But what you see over in Europe is really this totally divided up kingdom. There's all sorts of peoples. You got the Visigoths, the Burgunds, the Odysseers, lots and lots of these different little kingdoms that crop up. But with Charlemagne, it then shifts to this. There's maybe some subcategories here, but all of this, all of the what's there in those red borders, all the green, is Charlemagne's kingdom. And that's a very large kingdom. That's a lot of modern day different countries. That's France. That's maybe a little bit of portion of Spain, maybe not. That's portions of Italy. That's large portions of Germany. That's a lot of land there that is taken by Charlemagne in conquests. And so the Charlemagne Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, really is something that grows into something quite large. You have some theological controversies that take place in this time. Spanish adoptionism. We've talked about adoptionism before. It's an issue that comes up all the way back into the second century, but now it's kind of has a little bit of a reemergence and is perhaps a little bit of a different flavor of adoptionism. Uh, in Toledo, Spain, you have a guy by the name of Elipandus, who's the Archbishop of Toledo. He's going to be teaching that the Son of God, by nature, adopted his son, or the Son, his humanity, uh, in his humanity. And so, again, this is the idea of Jesus was once perhaps not God, and then he became God. Uh, you so often have these heresies that we've talked about. We've talked about a lot of different heretical views that the church has faced. They come up time and time and time and time again, and they may be presented differently and maybe repackaged differently. Maybe the differences are kind of large in presentation. Maybe they're kind of small in presentation. But these issues just keep coming up, and they still are coming up. We see a lot of these issues in modern day cultic groups, and these are things that are still present. But either way, Spanish adoptionism is not long lived. It's condemned as heretical in 794 at the Council of Frankfurt. Just kind of a minor theological controversy that crops up. Also from Toledo, you have the filioque controversy. The term filioque in Latin, filio is the word son, que is the word and so what this means is and the Son. So if you go all the way back to the Nicene Creed, you have the statement that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. And that was the accepted position in the Nicene Creed. Well, in an effort to combat Arianism in the conversion of these Germanic peoples, we talked about that 1 or 2 weeks ago, I guess. These Germanic peoples that have conquered the lands, the Christianity that they do know, if any Christianity, is largely Arian Christianity, which was condemned at the Council of Nicaea. And so really in the process of converting these people, they're wanting to push back against Arianism and really reaffirm the Nicene Creed. They add this statement that the Spirit does not just proceed from the Father, but also from the Son. And so the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. This is not going to be accepted by the Eastern Church. And to this day, this is a major point of contention between the Eastern Church and the Western Church. And if you ask many of the Eastern Church people, what's one of the major differences between you and the Western Church that's not been reconciled? What's the reason for the division that we're going to talk about here in a little bit? One of the answers primarily that the Eastern Church Christians will give is, well, the filioque clause. They say it's demeaning to the Spirit, and it places the Spirit subordinate not only to the Father, but also to the Son and various things. And so this is going to be a position that's going to cause a lot of consternation. Pope Leo III will actually reject this, though. He is not going to include the filioque clause in the Latin Roman liturgies because he doesn't want to alienate the Greek-speaking Christians. He understands that it's not accepted in the East and that it's very upsetting to them. And so in an effort to try and keep some peace, he does not permit it, although he perhaps agrees with it. Then you have controversies concerning the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist. You've got a guy by the name of Radbertus. He's a monk, and he is going to say that in the partaking of the Eucharist, when it's blessed, the Eucharist becomes the real presence of Christ, meaning that it is literally his flesh and literally his blood. And so when you take the elements are transformed from bread and grape juice, wine. They're transformed. They're no longer bread and wine. Now they are literally flesh and blood. And so this is called transubstantiation. And this is something that's going to ultimately win the day. And this is the official position of the Catholic Church and many other churches as well. But he's going to be opposed by another guy by the name of Ratramnus, who's going to argue that the flesh and blood are not physically, literally flesh and blood in the Eucharist, but it is flesh and blood in a figurative sense. And so there's going to be some debate about this. Eventually, though, the real presence is going to win the day and gain acceptance in the Western Church. In the Eastern Church, not so much, but in the Western Church, it's going to win the day. Then you enter into a period called the Dark Ages, and this is sometimes, I guess, perhaps a misnomer. While the Eastern Church has a golden age, we talked about the rise of Justinian and how things go very, very well in the Eastern Church. Not quite true for the Western Church. And so in the 9th to 11th centuries are sometimes called the Dark Ages, although that term is not quite used as much anymore. And there's a couple reasons for that. There's been some significant threats by the Scandinavians. So again, those northern peoples have a big migration down south into the mainland of the continent. And they're very strong, frightening, dangerous people. And just as the Germanic people were seen as barbarians, so too are these people seen as barbarians. They're pagans. They don't believe in Christ. They're not Christians. You have this is the time of the Vikings, and the Vikings are very violent pirates, and it's a dangerous time. Ultimately, this threat's going to kind of be assuaged and fade away as the leaders of these Scandinavian peoples become converted to Christianity. And so in 965, you have Bluetooth of the Danes. And by the way, if you have Bluetooth on your phones or whatever, it's named after this guy because it was developed by a Danish company. But anyway, in 965, Bluetooth will be converted. In 995, Olaf, king of Norway, will be converted. In 1008, Olaf, king of Sweden, will be converted. And so with these conversions of these influential people, the Scandinavian threat kind of peters out. But it's some hard going there for a little while. You're also going to have in this time a real period of papal decline. The papacy is going to be filled with just some incredibly immoral people filling the office of pope. They're often going to be very young guys too. And so in the past, the papacy is a very revered position. You're the bishop of Rome. You're the head of the Roman Church. And for some time now, you've been not just the head of the Roman Church, but you've been the head of all of the churches, so to speak. And so for that type of power and that type of position to be in the hands of somebody that's immoral and young, you got some problems. There's a couple interesting stories that arise from this time period. You got a guy by the name of Pope Formosus in 891 to 896. He is in the middle of some political scandal, some political treachery. He crowns somebody king, and then he takes it back and crowns it to somebody else. And anyway, after his death, his successor, Pope Stephen, is going to exhume his body and place it in his papal chair, and then they're going to hold court and accuse him of his treachery, and he's going to be condemned. And so what are they going to do? The fingers of his hand that in which he conferred his papal blessings, they're going to cut his fingers off. This is a corpse, by the way. His vestments, the priestly vestments, they're going to be stripped off him. He's going to be naked, and his corpse is going to be drugged through the streets and ultimately thrown into the river. And so, you know, some great things going on there. You're also going to have uh, the papacy be the subject of political influence and bribery. And so, if you're from an influential family or if you're rich, why don't you just buy the papacy? And that's exactly what's going to happen with Pope Benedict the Ninth in around 1012 to 1056. He's going to become Pope at age 18 through bribery. He's going to be described as a demon from hell by some. He is allegedly, and how true these stories are, maybe they are, maybe they're not, I'm not sure. But he is allegedly going to be participating in murder and rape and orgies and sodomy and all sorts of terrible things. And so the papacy has really not been in a good place. And even today, this is not anything that current Catholics deny. They recognize that the papacy was in a seriously bad place. They see it as a sign of God's hand on the papacy that it comes out of this at all. Okay, but the papacy's in a pretty bad place here. And so, coming out of the Dark Ages, you're going to have some revival that takes place. You're going to have some monastic revival. You're going to have a monastery in Cluny that really rises to prominence and becomes very significant in the Western Church. It's a third force. So you think about the papacy being a very strong force in the early church, or not early church, in the Western Church. You think of the empire being a significant force. And now you think about this monastery as being a significant force. They're going to push for religious reform. They're going to push for civil peace. They're going to say, protect the defenseless. It's the obligation of Christians to protect the defenseless. It's going to be the obligation of Christians to limit warfare to certain days. We don't want just absolute chaos. We need peace. And so they're going to do that. I don't know whether that takes off too well or not. They're going to advocate for the celibacy of the clergy, and they're going to impose it upon the clergy. Even secular clergy. And part of the reason why they do this is they cite the Nicolaitan controversy that's mentioned in the Bible in Revelation chapter 2, which seems to have something to do with sexual sins going on. And they're going to say, well, the clergy needs to be totally above that, and so the clergy just needs to totally abstain from all sex. The Western Church is going to embrace this. The Eastern Church is not going to embrace this. In the Eastern Church, you have bishops that are, you must be celibate to be a bishop. But for the rest of clergy, you don't have to be celibate. And so this is going to become a sharp distinction between the Eastern and Western Church as well. And they're also going to oppose simony. And so what is simony? This is a term that refers to the attempt to purchase church offices or attempt to purchase gifts, spiritual gifts. And the term goes back all the way to in Acts. You have Simon the sorcerer, or Simon Magus, as you might see him called. He attempts to purchase spiritual gifts for himself, and he's condemned for that. And so the influence of the Cluny will be to say, you absolutely cannot be purchasing church offices. Perhaps, a bit of pushback against what's been going on. You're also going to have a revival of the papacy after these dark ages where you have this long series of really immoral popes. The Pope has been the head of the church for a long time. And in theory, that authority has been stronger than in practice. Um, it's a big world, and Rome is one location, and there's a lot of churches out there. And so Rome can exercise authority, but whether that authority is always followed or not, and those edicts that Rome issues, whether those are followed or not, it's a little bit of a different matter. But coming out of the Dark Ages, this papal authority is really going to be more solidified, and it's going to become more actualized. As the papacy, one such way is you're going to have Pope Leo the Ninth. He is going to turn the cardinal system into something much more significant than what it has been before. Um, when you think about the cardinals, we've not really talked about this before, but originally what the cardinals were, it was an advisory board to the Bishop of Rome that really came from the Roman Presbytery. And so as you've had the exaltation of the mon-episcopacy, the rise of the bishops, the presbytery have still existed in Rome. The presbytery has kind of morphed into this cardinal system that still exists to this day. What Pope Leo is going to do, though, is he's going to transition the cardinals from a localized board of advisors to now a international board. And so cardinals are not just going to be from Rome, but they're going to pull them from all these other churches throughout the world. And it's going to be called sometimes the Senate of the Roman Church. Significant, influential people are going to kind of represent their own interests and have a ear to a voice in the ear of the Pope. And what that's going to do is really bring some administrative cohesion to the Catholic Church as it is trying to exert its authority throughout large territories. So let's talk about the Great Schism, which is what all of this has been pointing to. The Great Schism is going to take place in 1054. And it's going to take place largely because of some conflicts between the current Pope, Pope Leo X, or Pope Leo IX, rather, who's there in Rome, and the Patriarch of the Church of Constantinople, who is Michael Cerularius. Michael is going to look at the failures of the Western Church in the previous centuries, the immorality of the papacy, and the various ways in which the Latin Church has progressed, and the Eastern Church has not been on board. And he's going to take some serious umbrage with the way that the Western Church has been running. He is going to be threatened in some ways. Again, there's this close relationship between the Church of Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire. As the Latin Church, as the Western Church has tied itself to the Frankish Empire, the Eastern Church has been tied to the Byzantine Empire. There's some territorial disputes that begin to happen, and Michael is going to feel threatened by the Latin Church. And so he is going to close all Latin-speaking churches that are within the Eastern Byzantine Empire. And he's going to attack the Latin Church for being heretical. He's going to attack the Latin Church over their use of unleavened bread in the Eucharist, which is kind of interesting. Most of us, I would say, if you're watching this, unleavened bread is the standard practice for communion, for the Lord's Supper. The Eastern Church is going to say that the term that's used in Greek for the Eucharist bread is just the standard term for bread. And they're going to say that in the Catholics, the Western church's insistence on the use of unleavened bread, that they're no better than the Jews. Um, I don't think that's a particularly convincing argument. I think there's some other things that need to be considered, but that's what they're going to say. They're going to he's going to have some challenges about the forced celibacy of all the clergy. This is something that's being imposed upon the clergy that's just not there in the Bible and has not been the standard practice. And so there's this a distinction here. He's going to see Western images as seriously problematic. We've gone through the iconoclasm controversy, and while Rome and while the West and the East have been in agreement with that, there's going to be still some lingering disagreements. He sees that the Western use of portraying Jesus as a lamb is demeaning to Jesus, because Jesus does not come incarnate as a lamb, but rather he comes incarnate as a human. And so he should not be portrayed as a lamb artistically. He should only be portrayed as a human. He's going to take umbrage to the eating of strangled meats. The Germanic peoples are going to be big fans of blood sausage, as well as other things. And so the eating of blood is going to be a significant issue that's going to come up. And then the inclusion of the filioque clause is going to be a significant factor. That's going to be, in the aftermath of this, going to really, really develop and solidify this division that's going to come up. As the Patriarch Michael does all of this, Pope Leo then, in turn, makes his own complaints against the Eastern Church. And so he's going to also see issues with clerical marriages that take place in the Eastern Church and say it should not be that way. He's going to take umbrage with the fact that Latins are rebaptized by Greek churches. And so if you go transition from a Latin church and you move to a Greek church, the Greeks are going to say you need to be rebaptized. That's going to be an insult. And he sees the practice of the Greek church in waiting till the 8th day to circumcise, or not circumcise, but to baptize their child. He's going to see in that a bad practice. They should be baptized, immediately. If they're sinful at birth, they're lost, which has been the position that's taken hold in the West ever since Augustine. Then you shouldn't wait. He's going to see a serious issue with Michael's use of the term ecumenical patriarch. And for that matter, quite a few of the Eastern Church will take issue with that as well. Ecumenical is the Greek word for universal. And so Michael claims to be the patriarch of the universal patriarch. Pope Leo is going to see that as a personal threat because he is the Catholic Church is the predominant church, and he's going to see that in the Catholic bishop. He's going to see that the Roman bishop is the one who ought to have authority over all other bishops. And so he's going to take some umbrage to that. And then he's going to see that Michael is making claims to have authority over the patriarchs of Alexandria and Antioch as a problem as well. So this is going to eventually explode. He'll also see that there's past patriarchs of Constantinople that have taken and embraced heretical positions in a lot of those debates that we've talked about before. So this is all going to explode in 1054 when the Pope is going to send a delegation to Constantinople. He's going to send 3 men to represent him, and they're going to go and lay down a bull of excommunication or an edict of excommunication from the Pope against Michael and anyone who's associating with Michael. They're going to walk into the Hagia Sophia, that huge cathedral that's there present in Constantinople, and say, we're done with you guys. You are not to have any. You are not to be a part of this church. Michael then, in return, goes and excommunicates the papal delegation and all his associates. He doesn't excommunicate Pope Leo because Pope Leo has died at this point. Um, uh, but he is going to excommunicate the papal delegation. And so now you have both ways. They're excommunicating each other. And this division is going to be a division that is really going to last. Um, so some factors that have really led to this conclusion. It's kind of been a work in it's been in the works for a very, very long time. There's been some severe differences in how these churches identify with themselves. The Eastern Church sees itself as autocephalous. That's the word that they use to describe themselves. Auto meaning self, and cephalus is the Greek word for head. And so they're going to see themselves as a local assembly, or a fellowship of local assemblies. They're united in the sacraments, they're united in doctrine, they're united in creeds, but the local churches are going to have authority over themselves. And predominantly, there's going to be, they see 5 of these major churches. There's the church at Rome, there's the church at Constantinople, the church at Antioch, the church at Alexandria, the church in Jerusalem. These are the 5 significant major churches, and they're all equals in the eyes of the Eastern Church. The Western Church does not see itself that way. The Western Church sees itself as increasingly hierarchical, under submission to the papacy. And so that's going to be just a fundamental difference in the way they view themselves that's going to become really hard to reconcile, and in fact is still not been reconciled. There's going to be linguistic barriers. If you remember, we've put up quite a few maps of the division between the East and the West. The Western Church is going to speak Latin. The Eastern Church is going to speak Greek. And many of the Western Church don't want to learn Greek. They're comfortable speaking Latin. The church in the West who speaks Greek, they're just not going to see a reason to speak Latin. And so a lot of the communications and conversations that are happening in the Eastern Church, the Western Church is not going to be a part of. And a lot of conversations that happen in the Western Church, the Eastern Church is not going to be a part of. And so there's just this fundamental breakdown of communication between the Eastern and Western churches. They're just not talking to each other. There's going to be geographic barriers. Again, Rome is, of those 5 significant churches, Rome's all by itself. Those 4 churches are in different regions, but they're all relatively close to one another. They're all on the eastern side of the Mediterranean for the most part, and Rome is way over there in Italy, very far away. And so there's a significant geographic barrier. It takes a long time to get communications across to one another. Political barriers. Again, Eastern Church is very heavily tied to the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople is the capital city of the Byzantine Empire. Now Rome has really aligned itself with the Frankish Empire and has created its own Holy Roman Empire. And so you got these political differences, and that there's land disputes and things like that are going to emerge. Church governance, we talked about that a little bit, but the Western Church is hierarchical, functioning like kings. Eastern Church is going to be, independent. You got theological differences that emerge. Just to name a few, filioque, Christological differences, Eucharistic differences. The Western Church really adopts that real presence, transubstantiation, whereas the Eastern Church does not see it as physical, the literal presence, but as more of a figurative sense. Issues about clergy and those sorts of things. And so there's a lot of factors that have been dividing these two and really pulling these groups apart for a very, very long time, for centuries. And this isn't even the first schism, right? We've talked about previous schisms between the East and the West, but all of them have eventually resolved. At a certain point, they've come back together and reestablished unity and really tried to work things out. But at this point, perhaps the real reason for this division and the lasting nature of this division, which has endured till today, uh, perhaps they're a bit warmer towards each other now today than they have been since this time. But for 1,000 years, this division has endured, and it's still enduring. Perhaps the greatest reason is that there's just not the desire to have unity anymore. They're content and they've just gone their own ways, and they've not been striving to preserve that unity. A lot of this has been put on Michael, and certainly he deserves a lot of the credit or blame for this division. But there's just hasn't been the same type of efforts to reestablish unity that there were in the past when these schisms have cropped up, and as a result, the unity is just gone. And I think that's a bit sad, and I think it's pretty telling. And so we've covered a lot of time. We've covered 1,100 years in this class. We started talking about the apostolic age with the age of the apostles as they've gone about their ministry, and the generations that have followed after that. And I hope this has been beneficial to you. I think it's a good study. What sticks out to me, though, and I think when I look at this, is that church history is it's messy. This may have been confusing to you at times. It's been confusing to me at times. There's so many names and so many different positions that people are taking, and there's an ocean of literature. No one has read all that there is to read. It's impossible. If you started now, you could never fully get through it all. It's a mess. And despite all of that, it's remarkable that they lasted as long as they did. It's not very long in church history that you go before you start to see significant departures from apostolic Christianity. In my thought, I think that the first major departure really happens beginning of the 2nd century with Ignatius of Antioch. Ignatius is the one that really pushes forward for the monepiscopacy, the elevation of the bishop, and I don't think it comes from a bad place. I think he sees schisms that begin to emerge and disunity within the church, especially in the face of persecution, and so he attempts to create order in the best way that he knows how, which is a single authoritative figure. But I think that push really leads to a lot of significant issues downstream that we still are facing today and are still incredibly prevalent. It's hard to determine a single time, a single period where things go wrong, because it's human sinfulness is incredible in its propensity to mess things up. And so even in the biblical period, even while the apostles are still on the earth, you have schismatic groups that are forming. You've got Gnostic tendencies that are beginning to emerge, and all sorts of issues. And so, the history of the church is the history of God's people, and people are imperfect, and people make mistakes, and people sin. I think it just goes to show that there is a constant need for restorationism. You see it in the Bible. You see it in Israel, and with Josiah, and you see it with Nehemiah and Ezra, and you see it all throughout history. There's a constant need to restore God's people that have erred from what's good and what's right and what's true, and have begin to innovate and begin to create their own perception of what the church should be, or of what God's will is. And so restorationism is a constant endeavor, and it's something that will never end. Um, and tradition has to take a backseat to Scripture. Um, Moving on from this time, tradition is uh, going to become so problematic. Tradition will be held on with equal regard as Scripture, and that just cannot be the case. And so, when Scripture becomes synonymous or when tradition becomes synonymous with authority, you're going to see the rise of a lot of things that are not good in the church. And finally, I think when you look at all of this, I think you see that unity can only be maintained when it is actively sought. Uh, the church, for a long time, really desired to be unified, and they overcame a lot of issues. Um, you know, all of the Christological heresy, controversies, all of the persecutions, all of the you know governmental political issues that come up. They maintain unity for a long time because they have a desire for it. But when that desire dries up, there goes the unity, and the division is quick, and the division is permanent. And so I think it shows a need for continued pursuing of unity in the church. Um, Church history, I think, is full of lessons. I like history. I'm a nerd that way, and if you stuck with me this time, I guess you probably are too. Um, there's a lot to learn, and it makes me thankful for Christ, who is forgiving, and a Christ who is given us a word that is infallible, and a word that has persevered and endured. Um, and so I hope that this has been beneficial to you. I hope that you've learned some things and maybe seen how our religious context today has grown out of all of these things and these controversies that have taken place in the years gone by. These people aren't perfect, but there's certainly a lot to learn from them. So thank you guys for being with me throughout all of this, and I appreciate you guys for watching.